Before I answer the question, did I do my homework? I'd like to take this opportunity to say you're the greatest teacher that I've ever had. Understanding and forgiving, especially today.
Carol Norgren Day's life has been about education. Her mother and aunts were teachers. A sister was a teacher, and she herself became a teacher in both traditional and non-traditional settings. Education is a lifelong passion for this woman, known to friends and even total strangers as that friendly, generous, persuasive woman, always pleasant, likable, and humorous. Carol uses those characteristics to help others learn and to keep learning herself.
When you hear her voice on your phone and you know she's likely to ask you to do something, you just might as well say, "Sure, I'll do it," right away, even without knowing what it's about, because you know you'll say it in the end anyway.
Carol's family originated in Sweden, with 3 of her grandparents coming to America on immigrant ships in the 1860s. Carol herself hails from Evansville, Minnesota, appearing as Carol May Norgren, a third-generation Swedish-American, arriving to John and Nanny Norgren in 1928, the youngest child in a family of 6 other siblings. How does the littlest girl manage with 6 active and boisterous siblings?
I went and found a book to read and sat on the little bench and got lost in a book. My main reason for doing that was to get out from underfoot and out of the way of my older brothers and sisters, who didn't always have a whole lot of patience with me, especially if they were busy.
The Norgren family ties to their Swedish heritage was reflected in their possessions and in their customs. One of the family heirlooms, a Swedish tablecloth, would have adorned the family supper table at Christmas Eve, holding up the traditional feast of fruit soup, lutefisk, potato sausage, boiled potatoes, rutabagas, and of course, crème, a grape pudding eaten as dessert. Carol has many memories of Christmas in her family. One of her favorite gifts came in the form of a longed-for doll.
All my young life I had played with hand-me-down dolls from my big sisters. And when I was either 7 or 8 years old, I decided that it was time for me to have a doll of my very own. It was not a good time to make that decision because my parents talked quite a bit about something called hard times, but I didn't really know what hard times meant. But here there were 2 very similar sized packages, so I opened it, and here to my total amazement was Patsy, the doll that I had dreamed about during the whole month of December. She had a little girl that was very anxious about this doll in the Montgomery Ward catalog. And they lived not too far from the big Montgomery Ward store in St. Paul. And I suspect that they took a clue from Mom's letter, and my big brother, being the loving brother that he was, thought that his little sister ought to have this doll.
Carol's family liked to sing, and they sang a lot. In the family car, a Model T Ford, or around the parlor organ. The family was a true American and Minnesota family, enjoying their heritage, yet taking an interest in American customs and an active part in their communities.
We didn't have Easter baskets at home, but we always had hard-boiled eggs. And my dad would look out on Sunday morning and he would see a rabbit, and that was the Easter bunny. And that was, other than going to church, we didn't celebrate Easter anymore in any special way. Memorial Day was very important to my parents to go into town and hear the speaker, which, if the weather was nice, was held outdoors in the village park. The band played, and I would hold tight onto Papa's hand because there were many, many people. And after the speaker, he would take me over to Lane's Cafe and buy me an ice cream cone and buy one for himself. And this was very special. Papa and I shared an ice cream cone.
Carol Norgren enjoyed her growing up years in her home on the farm and graduated from Evansville High School as valedictorian in the class of 1945. From there she went to Moorhead State Teachers College in the accelerated course of elementary education. As an adult student, she continued her collegiate degree at the University of Minnesota Morris, studying education, history, and library science. Following the Moorhead State program in 1946, Carol was faced with the need to find a job. She became the teacher in Country School District 41, grades 1st through 8th. She would stay there for the school years 1946 through 1948. Living in town at Hoffman, she rode the bus to the country school with her students.
I was 18 years old when I started. I was very fortunate in the fact that the school that hired me was a very modern school.
In 1948, Carol became the 7th and 8th grade teacher principal at Wendell Elementary School. She only stayed in this position 1 year because while teaching her previous years at country school, something important had happened. Carol was invited to join some friends for a movie, and they had invited another friend as well, who turned out to be Gene Day. Carol liked him immediately.
I was quite impressed by him because he was, he dressed nicely, he was well-mannered, he was quiet and soft-spoken, and most of all, he had the same love of music that I did. We liked the same songs.
The evening breeze caressed the trees tenderly.
They began a courtship that lasted 2 years. Sundays, they would go for long drives in Gene's shined-up car. They enjoyed seeing all the new movies released and listened to music. All of this time spent together made them aware of their compatibility, and they married on November 25th, 1950, at the Swedish Lutheran Church in Evansville. They took a 3-week road trip to the West Coast, Carol's first of many trips with Gene. Because Gene worked with his father in the Harry Day road construction business, the young couple began looking for a home in Morris. They found one on Lyndale Avenue, where they lived for 19 years. Eugene continued to work in the road construction business and changed the name to Eugene Day Construction following his father Harry's death. In 1951, their household was expanded by the arrival of a baby daughter named Candace Jean, and the family of 2 became a devoted family of 3. As many families do, they had their eye on a different home. There was this house on 7th Street, a mysterious house where the blinds were always pulled and nobody ever saw any residents. After they purchased the home, they discovered no nail had ever been pounded into the woodwork and no furniture had even been placed in the living room. The house was like new. They sealed the deal on Valentine's Day in 1969, and this home has remained the day home for more than 4 decades. From 1962 to 1971, Carol worked as a substitute teacher at Morris Area Elementary School. These are busy years, with Carol also being a Sunday school teacher, Ladies' Aid officer and member of the church council at First Lutheran Church. She was involved in many of the literary and study club projects. The women's clubs did major promotion for the West Central School of Ag becoming a 4-year liberal arts college. They provided the Rest Cottage retreat station at Stevens County Fair and made sure that there were street signs labeling the streets of the city of Morris. Daughter Candace brought additional warm bodies into the home in the shape of enthusiastic Chihuahua dogs that became the family pets of choice. Candace graduated from Morris Area High School in 1969 and headed for St. Scholastica in Duluth for her college degree. She married Tim Altonen in September of 1988 in Duluth, Minnesota. Right about the time Candace left home for college, Carol became a Title I paraprofessional at the Morris Area Elementary School, a position she held for 25 years. She worked with third graders the first year and second graders after that. Title I's purpose is to reinforce reading and math skills. Carol's personal interest in history and heritage inspired her to bring it to her classrooms. Each year, they celebrated St. Lucia, where the oldest boy and girl in their classes would wear crowns and pass out ginger cookies. She also shared her collection of well-preserved toys from home for students to compare to their modern ones, a history lesson that often astonished them. Some of the carefully preserved toys that keepers Jean and Carol had as children are now part of the Stevens County Museum collection.
It's an important thing to remember as a teacher, which Carol did, that every child in a classroom is the most important child in the world.
In 1958, Carol was asked to be the judge in the Family Tree Contest sponsored by the Stevens County Historical Society. And the rest is history. This began Carol's association with the society and the museum. She first worked as a volunteer and then as a board member. And in the early 1980s, the Historical Society felt a need for a renaissance, with fresh eyes looking towards the future. Finding others interested in this renewal brought about a newly formed board of directors. Ward Voorhees became the chairman of the board, and Carol became the director. In the summer of 1984, the staff was Carol and Marilyn Beyer, another teacher from school who worked at the museum in the summers. Soon Larry Hutchins was hired as a curator and exhibit designer. Carol continued with the administrative work and the creative programming ideas. Tammy Plank was added as a staff person working in the secretarial area in the first years and later as a researcher. Carol remembers juggling her Title I and museum duties, working at the school until 2 each day, and then going to the museum from 3 to 6, and often sitting up on her table in the evenings at home. She credits her ever-supportive spouse, Jean, with being the wind beneath her wings in this very busy career time. She was always more than an administrator. Her interest in reading and literature promoted the publication of several books. A History of Stevens County using Delmar Holgraffer's illustrations, then Syrup Pails and Overshoes, An Honest Day's Work, The 40s, A Time for War and a Time for Peace. These became enduring historical resources for the history of Stevens County and continue to be well read today. For 30 years she was the columnist in the Morris Sun-Tribune who wrote, Yesterday in Stevens County. Then the very popular Looking Back column, occasionally riling up people who didn't want something from the past mentioned. Imagine coming up with 365 historical events for each day of the year, a calendar that Carol produced in 1976. Because of her intense immersion into the local history for the Sun and Tribune, and her work with the museum with local documents and artifacts, she developed the wondered-at ability to come up with the exact facts needed, right off the top of her head. The Morris Area and Cyrus schools, along with Carl and Linda Retzlaff, who owned the parcel of land, all worked on developing a historical and environmental site known as SWELL, the Scandia Woods Environmental Learning Lab. A Blandin grant provided funds for the trail system, a classroom, trail guide, and historical curriculum which Carol helped to author. This opened seasonally in 1993 and continues today in 2013. Carol retired from the director's position in 1993, but not from the column writing until 2010. Then began another whole set of opportunities. Enter Carol, filling a familiar role as one of 2 county school teachers at the Historical Society Schoolhouse on the county fairgrounds. Students happily signed up to experience the country school life. There would be 10 or 12 students spending part of a week learning about turn-of-the-century school days. Her students learned about stitching as well as reading and writing. At recess, she engaged them in games such as Ante-I Over. Teacher was not her only reenactment role. Her knowledge of the history of Stevens County and presentation talent became a solid performance career. She portrayed Mrs. Thomas Thomason, regaling school children with stories of pioneer life. She became an enthusiastic participant in rendezvous activities at Swell and continues to mentor present museum staff with her enormous base of knowledge and willingness to share. A current project, the editing and annotating of Ida Hancock's journals and diaries, will offer insight into the history of Stevens County during Ida's life. Ida is remembered as an early preserver of Stevens County history, a baton unofficially passed to Carol Day for the past 6 decades. A passion about heritage, history, and the education of others summarizes all of Carol's life's activities. She says her favorite words to hear from others is, "Why, I didn't know that." Inspiring others to learn something they didn't know is what an educator does, and is Carol's educational creed.
We need to learn about the past so that we can understand the present and build wisely for the future. Then we need to tell these stories to the next generation.